Hello, my name is Jared Prindle, and this is my presentation, my proposal for research. It's going to be on rite of passage programs, a possible intervention for strained parent-adolescent relationships. For the literature review, there was three types of cultural rituals that COUC515 et al. Talked about in their article in 2022. The first being doctrinal, which usually happens weekly and emphasizes beliefs. Calendrical, which usually happens once a year, like a holiday. And the third type is a rite of passage, which happens once in a lifetime and marks a coming of age. The American evangelical churches, which is the primary demographic I wanted to study, they don't usually implement a rite of passage ritual. Some of them do have confirmation classes, but these tend to stay in the spiritual realm and don't really translate into physical skills or other things, and don't mark the physical transformation of the individual. In the literature review on adolescence, I found that hormonal changes are thought to cause teenagers to strive for autonomy and incremental separation from parents. So they're just trying to figure out who they are and forge their own identity apart from their parents. Teens also partake in risky behaviors and experience adverse events that lead to poor health or diminished life opportunities, such as getting in trouble with the law and that being on their permanent record. This all leads to parent and adolescents experiencing increased frequency and increased intensity of conflict. And then where rituals come into this is, in general, rituals play an important role in emotional regulation, coping with stress, and social cohesion. For the literature review of rite of passage programs, there wasn't a lot out there for actual programs that students and youth could go through. I did find one study that said that was called a mixed methods evaluation of gender sensitive rite of passage program for adolescent males. This happened in Australia, and it studied the conformity of masculine norms. So not really parent-adolescent relationships. I had a hard time finding a gap statement. I searched for many days to no avail, and what I found was in this study that they called it a first of its kind. So there really is a big gap in the research on rite of passage programs specifically. I found a book called Rite of Passage Parenting, and it's a whole program. It's a 6-week class with a companion workbook by Dr. Walker Moore. And in it, it describes 4 essential experiences that make up the ideal rite of passage season. So number 1 is a rite of passage event. Think of a party or a trip that shuts down one's childhood and welcomes them into adulthood. Number 2 is expanding of youth's life skills with significant tasks. And a significant task is different from a chore. It's something where if someone doesn't do it, then other people suffer. So if you don't milk the cow, then there's just no milk for the whole family. Which brings me to logical consequences. These are consequences that aren't just you're grounded or you go to your room. They are realistic, real life, logical consequences. Number 4 is establishing their true identity with grace deposits, which basically boils down to treat them like an adult. Give them grace when they mess up. Make grace deposits into their spiritual bank account before you ever make a withdrawal or call them on something. For the research questions, I chose an experimental design because I wanted to test whether Dr. Moore's rite of passage parenting program would have an effect on the relationship between parents and adolescents. Would it increase the strength and satisfaction of the relationship? So the dependent variable is the parent and adolescent relationship. The independent variable would be the rite of passage parenting program based on the book. There would be pre and post tests, so it would be a within groups style, and the paired t-test will be used. My hypothesis is if parents and adolescents attend Dr. Moore's rite of passage parenting program and implement the teachings at home, then test scores will reflect a stronger relationship. Obviously, the null hypothesis would be that there is no change in the scores. In terms of population and sampling, I wanted to study evangelical churches in America. So participants will be recruited from many different evangelical churches. This could be done through a variety of church networks or denominational offices, such as the Southern Baptist Convention. The ideal sample would be families from a variety of racial and social economic backgrounds with youth, children ages 12 to 18. The test that I went with was the Parent-Adolescent Relationship Questionnaire. It provides different questionnaires for adolescents and the parents. I thought that was really good. It also covers 16 areas of the relationship or subscales of the relationship. It has a good test retestability so that we could do a pre-test and a post-test. Parent questionnaire had a Cronbach's alpha greater than 0.70 for 10 out of the 16 subscales. And the adolescent questionnaire had a score greater than 70 for 11 of the 16 subscales. So I would have a pre-test at the beginning of the parent-adolescent relationship questionnaire. And then they would go through a 6-week class going through the Rite of Passage parenting book with the companion workbook. And then it would conclude with a 3-week mission trip as a Rite of Passage event. Dr. Walker Moore has led many of these trips, and he suggested that it be a 21-day trip. On the trip, they will learn life skills such as how to navigate public transportation, how to manage money on a trip, and how to lead the group. And then also on the trip, they would help those less fortunate in a different geographical location. At the conclusion of the trip, they would come back and there would be a post-test. These scores would be calculated and compared with that paired t-test. We could do it within group, obviously, and then among group differences compared. Parent versus adolescent, male versus female, early adolescents, like say ages 12 to 14 versus later adolescents, which would be 15 to 18. In terms of integration, there is a story about Jesus' adolescence. Many people know about Jewish bar mitzvahs, and it is a rite of passage ceremony. And after a bar mitzvah, the young adult would often help out with the family business. So the story goes that they had traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover, and then when they're traveling back, they go a day's journey, and then they realize that Jesus isn't with them. So Joseph was probably traveling with the men and Mary with the women. They often traveled in large groups. So they had to travel a day back, and then they looked for him for 3 days. So that's 5 days that a 12-year-old boy had to find a place to live, find a place to some food to eat. And then, interestingly enough, when they find him, Jesus associates himself with his heavenly Father's business rather than Joseph's trade. In terms of why I'm wanting to research this, adolescents with strong conflict and low family cohesion are more likely to develop internalizing or externalizing problems. And in Matthew 5:14, Jesus calls his followers to be the light of the world. So if rite of passage rituals have a possibility to improve the parent and adolescent relationship, then Christian counselors have an obligation to shed light on the matter through quality research. And here's my references. And thank you all for listening to this presentation.